The Panama Canal was built with a fatal flaw. Every ship that passes through it requires an average of 200 million liters of fresh water. Yeah, you heard that number right, 200 million. To give you an illustration, imagine one of these tanker trucks that you see and drive past sometimes. Now imagine a queue of 182 of those. They'd stretch almost a third of the way to the horizon. That's how much water is needed for one cargo ship to pass through. Every day, 40 of these ships can go through the canal. That's an unimaginable volume of water. But why? Surely to make a canal, you just dig a trench from one ocean to the other, let all the water pour in and then sail on through. Why would you need to add any water to the system at all? If only it were that simple. Panama is not a flat country. As much as there are large areas of low-lying wetlands, the average elevation of Panama is 360 meters above sea level. Stretch an Olympic running track out straight and remove half of that final sprint, and that's some indication of how deep you'd have to dig that trench. Oh, and you need to do that twice so you could have a constant flow of traffic in each direction. We're not talking about construction technology today as well. We're talking about the late 1800s here. The kind of construction project was just not beyond the realm of affordability, it was beyond the realm of possibility at the time, so they needed to act smarter. The Panama Canal was designed to lift the ships up one level at a time. The ships would sail into a lock, the gates would be closed in front and behind, the water would be poured in until they were at the same height as the next lock. At that point, the gates would open, and they'd go forward, and they'd lift up to the highest point before they'd go through the same process in reverse to reach sea level on the other side. This saved them from having to dig an unreasonable amount of land. But to do this, they need water. Water always flows downhill. Pumping seawater upwards to fill the locks would take a huge amount of energy and would be liable to break down. Panama has an advantage here. It's a wet country, plenty of rainfall for most of the year, with a rich network of rivers and lakes dotting the landscape, already up at higher altitude than the canal. They could use this water to fill the locks, no problem at all, as long as the rain keeps falling. But what would happen to the canal and the world as a whole if there was some kind of impending disaster that would see previously freak weather occurrences become commonplace? What happens when climate change dries out the Panama Canal? Our planet is set up in long lines of dominoes. They loop around one another, split in two, rejoin somewhere else, circle round and round until they get to the final stop, you. A nugget of gold is dug up from a mine in Peru. It's shipped across the Pacific to a factory in China, where it joins rare earth metals from Chile and Mongolia. These are melted and molded in one factory, trucked across to another for assembly into a brand new iPhone. Crates and crates of identical phones perfectly packaged in boxes are loaded into a shipping container, onto the back of a truck, driven to a dock, loaded onto a ship and transported halfway around the world, only for it to be loaded into a freight train on the other end that transports it across the country to be loaded onto another truck, then to a warehouse, onto a shelf, off the shelf into an Amazon box, onto another truck, driven straight to your door, one domino after another, falling perfectly into place and setting the next one off at just the right moment for you to receive your package between 1:37 and 2:37 on a Friday afternoon. But what if one of those dominoes misses? What if the mine fails to excavate enough gold in the month? What if there's a fire at the warehouse? What if a box falls off a shelf? Or your delivery driver doesn't see that red light? These kinds of moments happen all the time. The day-to-day workings of global supply chains are always taken up with problem solving, putting backups in place, having alternative plans ready to go, building redundancies, contingencies to make sure enough dominoes fall fast enough for you to still get your new iPhone. We've seen this happen on a large scale a number of times in the last 5 years alone. When Putin invaded Ukraine, the international community swiftly announced economic sanctions and their boycotts. For many in Europe, Russian oil and gas underpinned a significant proportion of their energy needs. Germany, for example, imported 55% of their natural gas from Russia prior to the war, which in turn made up roughly 27% of the country's energy supply. While the international community was weighing up the economic catastrophe that losing Russia's supply would cause and whether they were ready to make that sacrifice, Putin got in first. He cut off the supplies to Europe. All of a sudden, Germany was forced overnight to fill a significant gap in their energy supply. Economists had predicted that the economic consequences would be severe, between 6 to 12% decline in the country's GDP over the following year. Germany acted swiftly and effectively, reopening coal power plants, delaying the shutdown of nuclear power stations, and greatly increasing their capacity to import gas from Norway and the US. The results? Just a 0.5% decline in GDP. Germany had contingencies, and they built new lines of dominoes to solve the problem. But what about parts of the world economy that simply don't have contingencies? Geographical limitations that force us to use one small 72-kilometer stretch of water for 40% of U.S. goods. Is there a contingency, some kind of backup to the Panama Canal? Back in the 1800s, ships hoping to go from one side of the Americas to the other had that exact problem. There were two enormous interconnected continents blocking their way, stretching for almost pole to pole like a great wall. For a ship to sail from New York to San Francisco, they would have to sail down the lengths of North and South America. At the southernmost tip of Chile, they'd then have to navigate the perilous Cape Horn. Shallow waters, sharp rocks, and fierce winds could tear apart even the most experienced vessels on the seas. Once they conquered that, they'd then have the arduous journey of returning all the way north again. The total length of that journey was 13,000 miles. Depending on the kind of ship you have, the weather conditions you faced, and your luck on the rocks, you could be looking at anywhere from a month to over 3 months at sea. Europe was all but cut off from the west coast of the US by sea. This wasn't a new problem. From as far back as 1534, King Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, sent out teams to survey the land linking North and South America for a potential crossing point. For centuries, the world had keen eyes on Panama, just a few miles across ocean to ocean. If there ever was to be a shortcut, it would be there. The Kingdom of Scotland in 1698 launched its attempt at a solution, a land crossing. Goods would be unloaded on one side and transported over ground to new ships waiting on the other. It was a disaster. Panama is cut into portions by 500 rivers that lace across the landscape. Most of them are unnavigable. Along the central spine of the country is a mountain range. For 7 to 9 months out of the year, it's the rainy season with frequent heavy showers drenching the landscape. Dense forest covers much of the land that's above the water, and temperatures are consistently high and humid. Inside those forests, you'll find venomous snakes, insects, and spiders. And that's if you haven't already caught yellow fever, malaria, or any other tropical disease. Trying to haul cargo across this kind of landscape pre-industrial revolution would have made weathering Cape Horn look like a dip in a paddling pool. The construction of the Panama Canal cut that 13,000-mile journey to less than half, at only 5,200 miles. It was a huge economic boom. All of a sudden, one side of America was connected to the other via sea. But it was not just that. Now Europe could not only ship directly to the west coast, but also had a shortcut through the Pacific to Asia. China, Korea, Japan, and Australia all now had a faster route to get their products to the UK, France, Germany, and Spain. It is not hyperbole to say that the construction of the Panama Canal played a key role in the creation of the global economy that we reap the benefits of today. Like sand poured through a funnel, thousands of container ships all converge on the same tiny point in the ocean, joining in an orderly queue to pass through the canal. Today, 40% of all U.S. maritime trade passes through the canal. It's estimated that $270 billion worth of goods go through the canal every year. So what happens if it dries up? We actually have a great recent case study for this, one of the hottest memes of 2021, the Evergreen ship that Tokyo drifted its way into blocking the Suez Canal. The ship, the Ever Given, was one of the fleet of ships owned by Taiwan-based shipping company Evergreen. It was passing through the Suez Canal in Egypt on the 23rd of March 2021 when unusually strong winds picked up, blowing against the side of the ship. Bear in mind that the Ever Given was 400 meters long and stacked full of cargo, so the force of the wind against the side of the ship was a force to be reckoned with. An investigation afterwards concluded rather vaguely that a couple of errors, either human or technical, then took place as the captain was ultimately unable to prevent the ship from turning sharply. The bow and the stern both ran aground in the shallow waters toward the canal banks, trapping it in place. There, the ship was stuck for 6 days, totally blocking off a shipping route that, much like the Panama Canal, allows ships to take a shortcut, avoiding the long route of going around the bottom of Africa. In just the 6 days that it was stuck, the Ever Given is believed to have held up $9.6 billion worth of goods. It wasn't just products and goods being held up by the blockage, it was food, medicine, fuel, and other essential items that are fundamental to countries on either side of that trade route. 130,000 sheep were on a Romanian transport ship stuck in the queue. For every day that they were held there, the crew burned through food supplies that were not allocated for such a long journey. With every passing day, more sheep died on the boat. For the last few years, there's been a semiconductor shortage, and the Suez Canal, while not the sole cause, did add further delays to the already long wait times, meaning that game consoles like the PlayStation 5 were in short supply after the console's launch. Shipments of oil were put on pause. As is typical with fuel, this led to a spree of panic buying in the US, Europe, and much of the world. While the supply of petrol would not have been significantly affected by the blocking of the canal, the public hysteria and worry led people to drive up and fill their tanks and even take home additional jerry cans of petrol, artificially inflating the demand and driving up prices in a self-fulfilling cycle. All of that happened in just 6 days. So what about if the Panama Canal dried up completely? Worryingly, we're seeing the beginnings of this happening today. Toward the end of 2023, Panama saw record low levels of rainfall. A drought struck the region, drying out the supplies of fresh water available for moving ships through the locks. This isn't a one-time accident like the Ever Given running aground. This is a sign of times to come as climate change only continues to impact the region. So what happens to the canal during the dry season? As we said earlier, the canal requires roughly 200 million liters per ship that goes through. In order to have a steady supply of water, the canal was constructed alongside the artificial Gatun Lake. The canal was originally a French project, but it was abandoned due to the high mortality rates for workers in the inhospitable conditions, as well as soaring economic costs. The U.S. picked up the project in 1904 and spent 10 years working on it to an estimated total cost of the project at $500 million of the time, which adjusted to today's money would be almost $15 billion. While that's an eye-watering sum of money, it pays its value back 18 times over every year. The French had been planning on the overly ambitious sea-to-sea approach, digging an enormous trench through the country. The Americans took a different approach, creating the world's largest dam at the time, the Gatun Dam, which blocked off water from the Chagres River and Lake Alajuela to create the world's largest artificial lake, which holds roughly 5.3 kilometers cubed of water. That should be enough, right? Not so. In the 1930s, they were already running into problems with a lack of fresh water supply, so they created a second dam, the Madden Dam above the Gatun Lake, as an additional water source. But all of this came before the dam's expansion. It was a construction project of its time. The canal was only built to hold ships with a maximum width of 32 meters, which was seen as future-proof at the time. But they had little clue just how large container ships would become over the next 100 years. There's a division of container ships known as the Panamax. In other words, it is the maximum size that can fit through the Panama Canal. These ships are 290 meters long and 32 meters wide. They can hold around 5,000 containers with a maximum load of between 65,000 and 80,000 tons. Not bad, right? Except the Panama Canal is shallow. A ship carrying that much weight would sit too low in the water and risk getting stuck. So they have a weight limit of 52,500 tons. Not ideal in terms of efficiency to be sending out ships carrying much less than their maximum capacity. In 2007, construction got underway to expand the lock sizes of the Panama Canal to usher in a new Panamax designation. The ships can now be 76 meters longer and 17 meters wider, with more than double the carrying capacity of 13,000 containers up to 120,000 deadweight tons. But even these limitations are lagging behind the largest cargo ships in the world that are continuing to grow larger and larger by the year. The current record holder is the ISC Irina, which holds 24,346 containers, nearly double the new Panamax standard. These behemoths of the ocean cut costs lower and lower the larger they get. Each journey costs money. The more you can load onto one ship, the better return you make. This is known as the economy of scale. Things get cheaper and cheaper per item the more of them that are processed. So why not expand the Panama Canal again? Make it future-proof for another 100 years. You will unfortunately be running into the same issue that's plagued the canal from the start: water. The current 200 million liter cost of moving a ship through would only grow larger and larger as the ships would grow. At a certain point, you run into a limitation imposed on you by nature itself. There just isn't enough rainfall. In 2023, Panama received a staggering 30% less rainfall than average. You might have heard the name El Niño in the news in the last couple of years. It's a name for a climate phenomenon where the sea surface temperature rise half a degree above the long-term average. This marks a dramatic shift in the climate, particularly around the Pacific, with more extreme weather conditions and hotter seasons. These effects usually come to a head in December, which is exactly when the issues at the Panama Canal were most apparent in 2023. Incidentally, that's where El Niño is believed to have gotten its name, a shortened version of El Niño de Navidad, the boy of Christmas, named after the baby Jesus by Peruvian fishermen. El Niño has been around for a long time, but climate scientists have observed an uptick in both its regularity and severity in recent years, a trend that seems only set to continue. In Panama, this means less rainfall to fill the Gatun and Madden lakes. Photos filled the news websites at the end of 2023 of worryingly low water levels in the lakes with dry brown banks. As a result, the Panamanian government had to drastically slash the number and weight of vessels they could allow through. Every 2 ships would use as much water as the entire population would need in a day. Daily traffic was reduced from 38 ships to 32 per day, and then again down to 30. There was less water in the canals themselves too, so the ships had to travel lighter for fear of grounding themselves. Ships were forced to either wait for days on end in the long queues that were building up on either side of the canal, or to pay a hefty fee to cut ahead in line. Some of these ships would pay $400,000, doubling the cost of using the canal in the first place, while others would pay upwards of $2 million. The fact that these costs actually made more financial sense than sitting and waiting for a few days shows us just how much money is tied up in these shipments arriving on time. Since the COVID pandemic, the global supply chain has been on the back foot. The entire world grinding to a halt created an enormous backlog of supply and demand that is affecting almost every sector in some way. As such, these companies that once had the luxury of being able to deliver materials a day or two late to a factory are now working on razor-thin turnarounds. Companies do not have the reserves they once did. Those were burnt through during COVID. And so right now the entire system is reliant on on-time deliveries. So how has this slowdown impacted the US? Not very much so far, fortunately. The US economy is not currently running very hot. The reliance on imported goods is relatively low, and so minor delays aren't being felt by the consumers very much and pose much more of a headache for the companies than an all-out catastrophe for the average Joe. But the nerves are definitely there. The shipping industry contributes 3% of the world's CO2 annually, and it's often pointed to as one of the industries in dire need of a green revolution. The problems facing them in the Panama Canal are arguably the direct results of their own hands. These ships are enormous in every sense of the word, including their fuel consumption. Depending on their size, they could carry 2.5 million gallons of fuel, all the way up to 5 million gallons or beyond. This volume of fuel does not come cheap, so the companies look to cut costs wherever they can. As a result, they often still use bunker fuel. This is made from the leftover dredges of the oil refining process. It has a nickname, heavy fuel oil. It's sludgy, thick, inefficient to burn, and full of harmful compounds. These compounds are still locked into the fuel, refined out from the more efficient fuels like petroleum, but are released when they're burned at sea. This is the dirty secret that underpins the world's economy, and sadly, it seems like it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets any better. The International Maritime Organization has estimated that by 2050, the carbon emissions from the shipping industry could rise by up to 250%. With these estimates, it wouldn't just be contributing 3% of the world's emissions anymore, but as much as 17%. Why? Because we are consuming more now than ever. We want more things for cheaper, faster. The shipping industry exists in the way it does because of our insatiable need for more. Our global economy simply cannot operate the way it does without our current shipping industry. Replacing all the fuel overnight with more efficient sources, and shipping costs will run through the roof while we see drastic fuel shortages. That's forgetting that all of these current ships, many of which have been running for decades, will need to be retrofitted for the change, costing millions per ship before you even account for the money lost from not running. And these emissions are directly contributing to El Niño and other climate emergencies. This industry is digging its own grave, and trying to divert it from the current course is the equivalent of trying to fight the winds buffeting the side of the Ever Given. So let's fast forward to 2050 and see what happens when shipping emissions jump by 250% and the Panama Canal completely dries up. The economy of Panama, built largely around the stable running of the canal, would dip into its recession immediately. The canal contributes 3% of the country's GDP per year, and up to this point, the government would likely be in significant debt after having invested billions in construction projects to prevent this from happening. Such an event would shake long-term international trust in the project and could see shipping giants instead investing in the longer journey around Cape Horn with larger ships than the canal would ever allow. Overnight, 40% of the United States imports would grind to a halt. Cars from South Korea, raw materials from Africa used in domestic industry, medicine from China, and oil from the Middle East and Norway are all suddenly delayed by weeks as the ships queue to traverse Cape Horn or cancel entirely as shipping companies decide it makes more economic sense to divert the shipments elsewhere. The price of fuel would shoot up, likely triggering panic buying and exacerbating the problem. With fuel shortages across the country, the average U.S. citizen would feel the pinch right away, as so much of the country's infrastructure is built around car travel. The price of medication would go through the roof as well. Many hospital patients would hear the worrying news that the hospital has run out of the drugs necessary to help treat them. The cost of goods imported from foreign countries would rise, and consumers would be much more hesitant to go out and buy, leading to an economic slump. Exports would be more expensive with less returns, leading to layoffs in a number of sectors. Tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Google, so reliant on shipments from Asia, would be forced to sell fewer products for higher markups and invest in setting up new supply chains, which could take years to come into effect. We could sit here for hours talking about every part of the economy that would be impacted, but the bottom line is that every part will be affected. It isn't the kind of economic event that would collapse the country, however. Look at Germany losing its Russian gas supply. It was costly, but they adapted. The US has freight trains running the length of the country. They have port cities along both coasts that could be expanded to cater to bigger users. There would be countless logistical problems to deal with across the entire economy, but they would be dealt with over time. What is truly scary is that this would simply be a matter of paving over the cracks. Losing the Panama Canal is one domino in a long line of them. But climate change isn't just affecting the one domino, it's affecting all of them. The world economy could deal with a Panama Canal crisis, but could it deal with a dozen of them at the same time? Or 100 of them? Flooding to major coastal cities costing billions in humanitarian relief, droughts wiping out the crop supplies of entire countries, infrastructure failing under intense weather conditions it was never designed for, a hasty and too late switch to green energy networks that isn't up to scratch. Climate change is not a Hollywood-style apocalypse where a sudden disaster falls out of the sky and wipes us all out. It is death by 1,000 paper cuts over years and years. Things come apart at the seams, life gets more expensive, and mortality rates rise and rise until society itself starts to collapse. What happens if the Panama Canal dries up? It's just the start of everything else that's about to come. Now check out how the US just paralyzed Chinese manufacturing overnight. Or watch this instead.